Tri-Cities. It is 9 o'clock and it's time for Coffee with Karl, 9 o'clock on a Friday, that is. I'm Karl from TRIDEC, and today we are going to talk about the Tri-Cities Legislative Council. We've got some great guests on for you who are coming online now, and as they come on, I'm going to introduce them. First up, we have Hector from the Visit Tri-Cities. Hector is the Vice President of, and I'm going to butcher your title now, Hector. Help me out.
Sports development.
There you go, sports development, including esports, right?
Yes, that's a big
right.
Part. Yes.
That's right.
Thank you, Karl.
Miles Thomas is the Director of Economic Development and Government Affairs for Port of Benton. Good morning, Miles.
Good morning. Got my title on the first try. Perfect.
I had to look it up, but I couldn't get to Hector. I started with Miles. I couldn't get to Hector. But before we jump to David, I did want to congratulate you on the birth of your daughter early in December, right? Stella, which is a life changer, but, you know, just excited for you and your wife and your family. And it's so awesome, you know, to have your first kid. How's it going?
Thank you so much. It's going really well. As you can tell, I do have to block out my background because a little hectic at home right now, but going well.
That's totally understandable. We've all been there and done that. I didn't get a chance to tell you, but I always tell people that are having their first kid, like, man, if you can bank up sleep, I just like sleep for a month or 2 months before you have a kid. Cause you know, if you can't bank it up, you'll use it later.
I have profusely apologized to so many fellow parents for any time that I said I was tired before December 6th.
We get it for sure. And last but not least, but our own David Replog, who's our Vice President of Federal Programs. Good morning, David.
Good morning, and congratulations too, Miles. And unfortunately, I think you might need that virtual background for years based on my experience. Just get used to it.
But I love when your kids join us on meetings, David.
Yeah, they've become a pretty regular guest on a variety of virtual meetings.
That's right. Well, let's kick off with our mug ceremony, if you guess. This one I just got for Christmas, and actually Tracy Jow and our team got it for me. It's the old Ted Lasso Believe mug. I love that show. I think everybody that's had a chance to watch it does, but it's just got some cool messages. I think with COVID especially, you know, just about how we work with each other, how we treat each other, just working as people. And that believe, you know, is obviously a sports message, which ties into Hector's specialty, but it sure applies to a lot of other things in life. So I think it's a really cool mug, and thanks, Tracy. I really like it. It's my new favorite mug. So let's talk about sports. Let's go to Hector next. What do you got for us?
All right, for us with Visit Tri-Cities, I have a Tri-Cities Washington branded mug there. Hopefully you all can see it, but this brand was initiated in 2014, and it was a project that came about with the TRIDEC and the Regional Chamber of Visit Tri-Cities at the time to create a unified brand for the community. And we've seen that incorporated not only with those organizations, but others throughout the Tri-Cities, of course, our city partners and our port districts, all the jurisdictions, our counties, everybody's taking really embracing that brand and showing that it really shows a unified front of the community. And so I think that's fitting for today with us talking about the Tri-Cities Legislative Council.
I just love seeing all the wayfinding signs going up all over town. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, it's really going well. Miles, how about you? What do you have for a mug for us this morning?
I am representing Illini today, University of Illinois. Sorry, I've got some light weirdness going on, but have to admit, it is the last mug that is not currently awaiting dishwashing.
As an Illini, I think that would be, like your go-to mug, but it seems like it was maybe in the back of the cabinet.
It's the one I savor for last. It's my favorite.
That's all. And I'll just say, like, anybody that's gone to U of I, we all have to stick together, right? Like, even if it's Idaho, Iowa, Illinois, we got to stick together.
Yeah.
Okay, David, how about you? What do you have for us this morning?
I have two this morning. Continuing the sports and the Tracy gift theme, I felt like it was imperative that I share my most recent gift from Tracy, which is a Seattle Kraken mug. It's nice. the new NHL hockey team based in Seattle, and I'm a big hockey fan. Grew up playing hockey, and always had a bit of a challenge finding a team to root for. So it's really nice to have a home team, if you will, that I could root for, and really appreciate the thoughtful gift. So the Seattle Kraken mug, and then the other one, which is sort of a plug and in some ways relevant to our discussion, is a Kennewick Police Department mug. And the reason why I share that is I got that when I think in November, myself and a couple of members of the Kennewick Police Department met with Representative Banky to talk about a really cool new program that I have the opportunity to serve as an advisor for, which is called the Blue Bridge Alliance. And the Blue Bridge Alliance the idea is to basically expand on what has already been accomplished within the Kennewick Police Department and the Kennewick Police Foundation. And if you're not familiar with it, the Kennewick Police Foundation takes donations and uses those to give police officers some discretionary funds to use if they, over the course of their job, if they come into contact with a family or a person who just needs a little help, whether it might be diapers for kids or a new tire or a person who's in a bad domestic situation, a hotel room for the night, that sort of thing. And so it's a really cool program. I think it's been really good for the community. It helps bridge some of the challenges sometimes that we have been strengthening the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And so the Blue Bridge Alliance is working on trying to take that model and basically with a sort of turnkey approach, expand it out to the rest of Washington State, and then hopefully even broader than that in the future. And so separately, we're kind of working to try to figure out if there might be some ways that we can help facilitate that in the legislative session as well. So thanks to the Kennewick Police Department for the mug, and I told them that I would share it the next time I was on Coffee with Karl. So that box has now been checked.
That's awesome. Well, they did a great job, and it's a great description of a great program. And too many times we think about the role that police officers play in our community, but the things that you're talking about, helping people out, obviously that's really their mission, and it sounds like a great organization. David, thanks for highlighting them today. So we've already got a question. Someone's wondering how many people ask Miles if he's Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know, Miles, you get that much, but I did want to ask that question to say that if you do have any questions as we go through and you're on Zoom, feel free to use the question and answer feature. And if you're on social media, if you want to put your question in the comment, we'll go through those and do our best to get to them. But has anybody ever told you you look like Leonardo before, Miles? That's
a first, but I'll take it.
Yeah, it must be the new dad thing. It's kind of like you're kind of like going into the next era and you're Well, today we're going to talk about the Tri-Cities Legislative Committee. Hector, you already kind of gave us a precursor to that with the collaboration for sure. But, we gave a general description, multiple organizations that we'll get into partner together on the Ledge Council, and it's got a relatively long history here in the Tri-Cities. And then each of our kind of organizations that are the sponsoring organizations, I guess, pick someone from their membership and from their leadership teams to actually chair the committee. And this year, Hector of Visit Tri-Cities is representing the group that's in charge, if you will, of putting together position papers and everything. And Miles is the co-chair of the committee this year. And I think I'm saying that correctly. David and I both serve on the committee from TRIDEC, and then we have some of our members on as well. But Miles, you want to kick us off, or Hector, whichever one you want to go, and just talk a little more in depth. How does the Ledge Council work? And then how do we put together the position papers and kind of like the collective legislative priorities that we share with our legislators?
Yeah, I can jump in. So this is now my second legislative session serving as Visit Tri-Cities rep, and first serving as co-chair. And I want to just mention co-chair is because there are two of us serving in that role to kind of balance out. And I just want to extend my great appreciation to Stacy West for taking on the last 5 weeks, which arguably are the hardest part of putting together all of the position papers from from our work towards the legislative session. So I believe the Legislative Council was founded in 1986, thereabouts. And its purpose is to share resources amongst our community, avoid duplication of efforts when we're going for the same policy change or championing a project for our community with the legislature or our region, and advocate for and promote the policies that are most important to the community. We can I don't want to have some long answers, but we can kind of jump around. I think Hector can give some feedback on kind of the agencies that are involved and some of the background, if you will.
Again, yeah, thanks, Miles. I think that's an important piece is, again, getting together and making sure we're coming in as one voice for the region on these legislative policies and issues. And so we do have 6 organizations that make up the Legislative Council. And I guess we call them members, 6 members, and that's Visit Tri-Cities. Then you have the TRIDEC, which is Tri-City Industrial Development Council. And then you have the chambers. So you have the Tri-City Regional Chamber, Pasco Chamber, the West Richland Chamber, and then also the Tri-Cities Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And so those are that's what comprise the council. And now each of those members have 2 voting representatives, and then they have 1 supporting staff member that makes up the council there. And we get together, we start, usually the time frame is we start in the fall. This year we started late August and into September, started getting the priorities together, and we start working with the community stakeholder groups. And so we look at legislative priorities from our cities, the ports. We have community organizations, public utilities, just various stakeholders in the community that we go and get their feedback to identify these what we call legislative priorities, or what we call standing positions as a council, and what we want to do for the legislative session. So we have them come in and do briefings. So this is something new that we just recently did the last couple of years, where we started these briefings. So Miles, I'll turn it back to you to maybe talk about those and how those
Absolutely.
go.
So we typically invite right towards the end of August, all of those kind of stakeholder organizations to present at least preliminarily what they're looking at to achieve with legislative action in the coming session. Right now, we stand at about 55, 56 stakeholder organizations that we reach out to. And that's all the way from cities, counties, port governments to the National Lab. We also coordinate with the Home Builders Association, Realtors Association, community support organizations like United Way, each of our hospitals and hospital districts, good roads, several of our transportation agencies. It's really, really across the gamut. We want to get impact from all of those organizations, agencies, and community organizations so that we can really have a wide net to cast in assessing things like economic development, taxes and spending, the impacts on K through 12 education, higher education. It's really a wide input that informs our different priority areas, and typically gives us about 8 to 12 page priority position papers that we use to speak on behalf of the community when we go to Olympia. Now, the last 2 years, we've not been able to go in person to Olympia, but we've invited our legislators to hear from us, our 8th, 9th, and 16th district legislators primarily, so that they can really hear from us what's most important to a lot of our community organizations. We don't agree on everything, and fundamentally how that happens is that we put everything up. We vote on the priorities that are most, out of all of us, the majority are able to forward to speak about and put up as a community position. And then we articulate the why of that legislative action and how it would help our community or the state. One of the really important things for us is getting that feedback. So we're always looking to cast a wider net for our stakeholder list. And I would encourage anyone that would like to be contacted to give us their legislative priorities or their organization's priorities for the legislative session to reach out to the Tri-City Regional Chamber that acts as our sort of administrative entity. I don't know their number off the top of my head, but it is info@tricityregionalchamber.com that they can email and request to be engaged with the Legislative Council. With that, I don't know, Hector, or David, or Karl, if you want to talk more about kind of the organizational support that you all provide or the chamber provides as administrative, if that's of interest.
Yeah, Hector, David, you want to take that one? Jump ball, keep on sports theme. We'll have a jump ball.
Yeah, administratively, yeah, we have our staff and our team members that help out with these two, I guess we could call them volunteers, right? So Miles is volunteering his time as well, and Stacy, for instance, representing Visit Tri-Cities on the council, but us as staff members with either Visit Tri-Cities or David, for instance, with TRIDEC, and then you have others with the chambers. They provide the support and making sure that the administrative side of this is make sure we're taking care of the business that needs to be done. And for instance, normally we'll go to Olympia, so that takes an organization, some organization of having the hotel, getting it all ready to go over in Olympia, and make sure we have a place where we can host a reception. And so the staff really takes that on and makes sure that that all takes place.
Yeah, and I think especially, a big shout out to Liz and Liz Rentz and Stephanie Bernard from the regional chamber team. I think they do a lot of really great work just to support the activities of the Ledge Council in numerous ways. And then also Tiffany Burke from the TRIDEC team has supported putting the final sort of booklet or brochure together. And in the past, as Hector was referring to, we used to print them out and be able to take them directly to the legislators in Olympia, but mostly now that's all been done electronically and virtually. But I think there's been pretty broad staff support from a number of organizations, but I really appreciate all the work that a lot of people do to kind of make all of this happen in the background.
That's a great overview. Go ahead, Miles.
I was just going to note too that often the legislative priorities that are selected by the volunteers as the board often become the legislative priorities of their sponsoring organizations. So they may take part of that or the entire slate of priorities depending on their focus. So for example, Visit Tri-Cities might just take portions that are relevant to tourism and opportunities for new tourism in the Tri-Cities, whereas other organizations might just take the whole slate and promote that within their legislative work.
And I think that's a pretty important point, Miles, because, for example, and I think Hector might talk more in depth about, tourism later on, but I think that's a good example where, of course, from Visit Tri-Cities perspective, the tourism elements in those legislative priorities are a top priority for Visit Tri-Cities. But if they're going and talking to legislators, it's not just Visit Tri-Cities who's making that point. It's all of the organizations and entities that are represented by the Legislative Council. So that gives, I think, a little bit more standing and significance, than any one organization by itself. So I think that's a good point.
Absolutely. And I mean, even representing tourism, we're referring to other sections of the priority position papers because of the impacts that it might have on a piece of tourism legislation. So it really gives us a better, more comprehensive picture of how each policy interacts with each other and how we can really advance some of our interest in supporting the region and the economy.
No, that's a great overview. I think maybe before we get into going through some of the specific position papers, that have been put together and been presented now, let's just talk briefly about the session itself. I think we've noted a couple times that obviously it's going to be virtual this year, that usually we'd go to Olympia and have actual face-to-face meetings. This year, it's all going to be virtual. But I don't know, Miles, maybe, or David or Hector, would you like to give us an overview of how's the legislature going to work this year? Obviously, last year was a virtual session. Looks like it's going to be virtual again this year. And then, in the budgeting process, we know we're in the biennium, so not necessarily a big budget change year. However, the governor's come up with a prioritized list of budget additions that he wants to have. Does anybody want to take a crack at that one?
I won't take that all on, but I will note,
okay,
just from one perspective, we don't always know exactly what bills are being introduced or considered when we finally finish our priority papers. We try to allude to the bills that we think are going to come up as part of session or that our region is hoping to advance. However, this really gives us a lot of background information to support or oppose a wide variety of bills that are introduced each session. And especially going virtually, this is a great resource for us to be able to speak with remote testimony on bills that are really important. In a lot of ways, the remote testimony has helped more of us get in front of these bills, and especially for those that aren't always able to get to Olympia. However, I'm really hoping that we introduce more hybridization of the remote testimony so that we can get back in person and really give it that, I'm going to say that passion, the in-person passion that they can really see by interacting with us in the Capitol. However, it has given us some opportunities to get in the face of more bills than we have in the past.
That's a good point. I think that's something that's come out of last year, is that because they did open up the way to give virtual testimony, or even just virtually weigh in as saying, support or oppose a specific bill in a hearing that we didn't have before. I think it has led to some equalization of, if you don't have close proximity to Olympia, getting there to give testimony or support or opposition to a bill specifically in person. And I think that's good, obviously, for us on this side of the mountains, especially this year with the weather and trying to get back and forth over the passes. But you're right. I mean, there is something that we all lack in virtual meetings like this one versus a face-to-face. So it'll be interesting to see the way that they come out of it. I mean, that you got to make an analogy to the vote by mail that we have in Washington, which, being a relatively new Washingtonian, I think it's great because it gives everybody a chance to actually weigh in and vote for that. And it's kind of like that same idea is like, how can you cast the net wider, make sure you give everybody a chance to have input? And so I think those are going to be some good things to look forward to this year. Well, let's get into the position papers. We've got a couple of questions about that. I think as we go through that, we should be able to answer them. But David, you want to kick us off with the first one, which is agribusiness policy?
Sure, absolutely. And so, as I think we all know, the agriculture industry is really important to the Tri-City area, whether it's the actual growing of food, whether it's apples or potatoes or whatever it might be, but also the food processing industry, all of the industries that support ag and food processing, whether it's fertilizer or ag chemicals or tractors or whatever it might be. It's a significant driver to our local economy. And so it is, I think, one of our, that's, I guess, why it's part of our priority issues. And some of the things, and I think our plan is to sort of go through these at a fairly high level. And I believe Tracy did share the link in the chat to the full booklet and all the position papers if folks want to get more details. But one of the things that, as Washington State has now passed a low carbon fuel standard and the cap and invest, they call it cap and invest policy structure, they're still very much in the rulemaking process, but we want to be very cognizant and flag that as they implement the rules, that they aren't implemented in such a way that negatively impacts the ag community and also rural communities that have just a different set of circumstances than you might find in more metropolitan urban areas. Again, for example, the low carbon fuel standard, if that changes the price of gas, and if you live in a rural community where you have to drive 30 miles to see your doctor versus if you live in a metro area where you hop on the bus, it's going to impact you differently. And so, I don't know if we're far enough along in the process to know exactly how that's all going to work out, but we just want to make sure that it is implemented in a way that's fair for the ag industry and for rural communities. One of the things that we've been tracking last legislative session and this legislative session as well, I think is going to be on the agenda, is looking at reducing the use of natural gas, whether it be in residential, commercial, industrial capacities. And that's something that I think we're very cautious about. Not that the larger goal to reduce carbon emissions and maybe change the way that we use natural gas over the long term is a bad idea, but especially in the short term, and especially when you look at the ag and food processing industries, they use a lot of natural gas to as part of their processes. And Karl, you and I had a chance to go down to Sacramento a couple months ago to for a informational tour and information session with a number of other state legislators and state agencies and organizations throughout the state to look at how they've implemented their cap and trade and their low carbon fuel standards. And maybe you can add on to it if there's anything I missed, but one of the things that you had a chance to learn about was a tomato processing facility down in the Sacramento area. And they've been able to use some of the funding through California's cap and trade program to implement efficiencies to their natural gas boilers and that infrastructure that they have at that facility. But they also looked at, if you wanted to fully electrify and move away from natural gas entirely, what would that look like? And they found that it would take their electrical draw from 4 megawatts to 83, just for that one plant alone. And so if you extrapolate that to the Tri-City Mid-Columbia area and all the food processing facilities here, and if we were to try to move all of them away from natural gas, at least in the very short term, to electrification, I mean, we'd need gigawatts of additional power, electricity to do that, and we just don't have that. So just want to ensure that folks are being very thoughtful as we work on continuing to reduce carbon emissions and do it in a way that's practical, achievable, and again, doesn't have unintended consequences or overly burden or impact certain industry sectors or communities. And then the last thing I just quickly touch on too is water rights. One of the things that makes our community and our area so unique even across the country is we have a lot of irrigated agriculture, and that allows us to have tremendously good yields and some of the most productive agricultural ground in the world. But ensuring that we have those water rights and that they're protected, and that they're protected in a way that allows for conservation without loss of those water rights is really important as well. And so, those are some of the things that we've really been trying to prioritize, both in this legislative session and in the past.
Maybe we'll stay with you, and actually what you just talked about with natural gas and clean energy and making that transformation and having a plan and make sure there's resource adequacy kind of fits in with our next priority paper, which is clean energy and lower Snake River dams. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that we have done as a community, TRIDEC, and a lot of our partners over the last 10 or 15 years really has been to recognize all of the incredible people that we have who work at the National Laboratory, at Energy Northwest, at the Hanford site, and they have some unique skills. We have some unique assets and capabilities with some of the former Hanford land and the innovators that we have here in our community. We really want and believe that the Tri-Cities is a clean energy innovation hub. And we want to grow that very actively in the coming years. And so when we look at state level policy, we really want to look at ways that that policy can help enable that growth, and how our community can help the state to meet its carbon reduction goals. And so, one of the things that we have heard from folks like X-Energy is that the Clean Energy Transformation Act from a couple of years ago really sort of laid the policy framework or groundwork to make sense to site a new advanced reactor here in the Tri-Cities or Central Washington region, because there's that policy driver to create more clean, non-carbon emitting energy. And so, if it's done right, it can be very, very beneficial. Now, again, time will tell, but again, we're watching really closely how they implement the cap and invest and the low carbon fuel standards to ensure that that hopefully is done right as well. One of the things that we're also very concerned about is the growing, I guess, conversation about potentially removing the lower Snake River dams. From our perspective, first and foremost, they're a source of over 1,000 megawatts of clean, non-carbon emitting energy. I think equally importantly, they are a reliable source. They reduce the risk of blackouts, brownouts. They're affordable for a lot of underserved communities. If they were to have to pay significantly more on their energy bills every month, that would be very impactful. And additionally, kind of going back to what I was just talking about with ag industry, there's a lot of agricultural products that move up and down the river system as well that's enabled by those dams. And so, we do know that the state is embarking on a process to kind of explore how, if you were to remove the dams, how would you do that and mitigate any of the negative impacts? And so, although I don't think love the idea of even going down that road, I think it'll be incredibly important as the state proceeds in that process that the stakeholders here in the Mid-Columbia Tri-City area are involved and are able to share the concerns. And I think it's very difficult to really quantify exactly what the impacts are, even how you would begin to mitigate some of those impacts. And so, we're watching that very closely as well. And then the other thing I would say about the dams and about advanced nuclear, the reactor that we're hoping to bring online in the next few years, is both of those sort of enable a lot of the other intermittent clean energy technologies, whether it's wind or solar or maybe even geothermal and things like that. And having that base load source that can be ramped up or down as the sun shines or as the wind blows or doesn't is incredibly important. And so, I think all those base load sources are helpful in the state and their country sort of, achieving our climate goals and our carbon reduction goals. And then the last couple of things I would just add is, in addition to the advanced reactor that we're hoping will be here the next few years, we also want to leverage all the things I talked about earlier to pursue advanced nuclear fuel, R&D, manufacturing, and then the supply chain. And in part because of our river system, we're a really great location to build or to assemble those reactors or those components and put it on a barge, take it right out to the Pacific Ocean, and help America become an exporter of some of these technologies to countries across the world, and not sort of just let Russia and China and some of the other countries that are selling those products dominate the marketplace. And then working on, and there's a lot of great work that Miles and Diane and the Port of Benton have been doing on both the nuclear supply chain work as well as with opportunities in hydrogen, both as a clean transportation, energy storage, and in some respects, kind of carbon sequestration. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on. And then lastly, I don't believe, I should probably know this, but I don't recall off the top of my head if there's any efforts this year for state funding specific to the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, but in the past, there's been some very meaningful state funding for equipment for some of the new facilities like the grid storage launch pad facility at PNL. And as a percentage of the total project cost, it's really not that much, but I think it sends a very strong and good signal from our state that they're partnering with the federal government, the Department of Energy, to support this, in a hand-in-hand, strong partnership. So, I think looking for opportunities like that in the future will be pretty important as well.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that's a good example. Both of those are good examples of the intent of the document. As Miles said before, that the language and the specific issues in each document don't necessarily relate to a specific piece of legislation yet, but to have the positions clearly defined, as you just talked about, gives us that chance as different pieces of legislation come up or other uses that we can use the document for. Miles, how about the next one? This is really your home base, but economic development and infrastructure financing. Can you give us an overview of that position?
Absolutely. So I just wanted to note that last year was a pretty great year for economic development financing from the state legislature. Not only were they able to pass tax increment financing, although not as broad as we would have liked, but it mimics a lot of the opportunity that was created through local revitalization financing in the past. Which really helped to establish the South Ridge retail tourism area and the North Horn Rapids Industrial Park. A lot of those projects are, we're really reliant on some outside sources of state grant and other excuse me, federal funding to be able to accomplish those projects, to recruit new industry and new retailers and even new tourism opportunities to our region. So tax increment financing did pass last year. Right now, I believe that City of Pasco, Port of Pasco are kind of slated to be one of the first to test out tax increment financing, which is going to be great for us to be a demonstration project. It's just been so well done in this region. We're hoping that is a good opportunity to show how TIF works and to be able to hopefully go back in future sessions and recruit some expansions to the program. That said, there was also, so TRIDEC is our associate development organization as part of the Department of Commerce. I believe you guys also received, across the state, ADOs received expanded funding in the last legislative session, which is essential to our ability to recruit industrial prospects and really bring in high caliber new job and job retention opportunities throughout our region. I will note, because we had the question in the chat, so small modular reactors were in the clean energy section, as David alluded to. They also make an appearance somewhat from another approach in the economic development infrastructure financing paper in the form of requests to support Washington Vertical. And David also alluded to that work, but Washington Vertical, we actually were already awarded funds just a few weeks ago. The State Department of Commerce, utilizing a pass-through grant that they received from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, awarded the region one of 5 positions in their Innovation Cluster Accelerator program, which our proposal was to really focus on creating a collaborative environment for clean energy production. And our first project relies largely on building the supply chain for small modular reactors. We're really taking that opportunity with X-Energy and some of the other reactor projects in other states to become a pipeline for the knowledge and expertise of developing that first of a kind supply chain, really. It's a new industry, we're establishing a new platform, and we're really building the opportunity for all of the businesses and research and development institutions to be a part of this new industry as it forms. In addition to some of those other programs, just in general terms, we've asked to retain or grow support for other funding mechanisms like the Associate Development Organization support, also to substantially increase or at least retain the amount of funds that are dedicated to the governor's Economic Development Strategic Reserve Fund. I guess that kind of covers the gamut, but we're always looking at opportunities to increase opportunities for financing that results in investment in our communities.
Yeah, no, that's a great overview. And obviously there's so many parts of economic development, but that's a really good overview of where we're at. Let's move to the next one, Miles. And I think that you're going to take this one to the K-12 and post-secondary education priorities.
Yes.
And of course, that's a very broad topic, but can you run through some of those highlights for us?
Absolutely. And I just want to recognize again, Stacy West, my co-chair, was really instrumental in gathering the information for the K through 12 and post-secondary education priorities. This was kind of her bailiwick and contributing to kind of the development of these programs for future workforce. It all plugs into future workforce capability. So we meet with all of the local school districts. They typically present to us together, as they typically have a unified message about the priorities most important to them. For the K through 12 focus, it's really about student equity and the pass through of state dollars for local school district control, so that we have an equitable approach to funding the programs that are most important in our community and most important for the success of our students. I think this is a recurring theme, but typically there is always a request for the legislature to address disproportionate allocations in the administration of some of the high poverty and disproportionate share of services to high poverty districts or high poverty threshold students, so that really that there is more equity in the average state student poverty allocation to support those students most appropriately. We also meet with the chancellors and presidents of Columbia Basin College, WSU TriCities, and I believe Evergreen, which is associated. Is it Evergreen? I'm sorry, I may be saying the name wrong, but it's associated with Columbia Basin College, another workforce development program. That program, we speak to each of those to assess their needs for additional funding from the state. And sometimes that's as simple as an increased assessment to properly compensate our professors and programs that are most supportive to the jobs developed in our community. This year, both WSU TriCities and Columbia Basin College had requests for capital expenditures for facilities. And WSU in particular had a request for a very near and dear project to our hearts, which is cybersecurity. We have a lot of support for cybersecurity from Representative Binky, and WSU is really investing heavily in our presence of preparing students for cybersecurity careers that really are amplified by the work that happens at Pacific Northwest National Labs, Energy Northwest, and plugs into pretty much every industry in our community. With that, I'll turn it back to you, or it may be another topic that I'm covering. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're next up again, Miles, but I just want to quickly say in the K-12, something that stood out when you talk about that disproportionate allocation. I think I wasn't aware that transportation is an issue for our local K-12 districts. You know, we talking about the talent pipeline that we all have needs for in each of our industries. I know Hector, hospitality, you know, the real shortage of talent across the board, from entry-level skill positions all the way up to PhDs at the lab. I know, you know, there's a need for more folks here. And as we look at that, you know, an idea that we've been kind of working on together is like, how can we get kids while they're in K-12 out to visit our industries, to have a tour? You know, once we're done with COVID, we get back to you know, actually being able to see facilities. You might drive by on a bus every day going to school, a manufacturing plant, you know, somebody that needs people right now. How do we get kids aware of that? And so we asked the superintendents when they were on for the K-12 session, you know, would there be money, or could we advocate for something that gives you guys money that we could do field trips, like for buses? And they brought up the fact that currently they have to use their general fund revenue to support the busing system they got just to get the kids to school, that they don't get enough money from the state the way that it's allocated to cover all their transportation costs. So I just wanted to bring that up as an example of something that does tie in, like you said, Miles, with, you know, what's the goal here as we get through education? It's really to get these kids lined up with education, training, and you know, that they can stay here in the Tri-Cities and have that job. So just wanted to point that one out. But now let's get into regional transportation priorities. And I know this is a huge one, but can you talk a little bit about, and I think part of this is, would the state actually pass a transportation bill? That was an issue, last year, and then some things happened with the governor, but you want to get into that one, Miles?
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
I did want to go back and mention, I had to look it up real quick. I've got too many names and organizations in my head, but it's Heritage University that is with Columbia Basin College programs. And specifically, they add some value to the Columbia Basin College programs, specifically in programs with education, criminal justice, social work, accounting, and psychology. And that's really turning associate's degree programs into bachelor degrees so that students have the success to either move on to career opportunities or to advanced education in master's or doctorate programs. Just wanted to make a mention of Heritage. They've been a huge component of our community pipeline of workforce development the last couple of years.
Definitely, thank you.
So on to regional transportation priorities. I get to cover a lot of this in my other duties as assigned from the Port of Benton. So really all of us are really integrated with transportation priorities. I mean, basically what you just mentioned, Karl, there's allusions between K through 12 education and our regional transportation priorities. It's one of those that really crosses the gamut across all of our priority areas. We have been hard pressed to work to establish a transportation funding package at the state level. A lot of the work that was done last year by our legislators that serve on the Transportation Committee has rolled into a very promising set of actions to bring bills forward for this session. It's still yet to see how that will all pan out, but for the last few years, the state allocation of transportation priorities and funding has really been to make sure that there's equitable distribution of state monies to projects throughout the state. And one of the oft repeated positions is that the state would like to see less reliance upon the state funding to support a lot of local projects. However, they also understand the connections between the local infrastructure and statewide logistics and supply chain management. So we're trying to shift a lot of priorities and help to reinforce our community's impact on state jobs, state logistics, and the impact that we have really in improving the economic viability of the state of Washington by having solid transportation infrastructure. It also connects to some of the clean energy goals. There's a lot of legislation about carbon reduction. There's a lot of legislation about decreased reliance on fossil fuels. And I would say our biggest message in the kind of fuel and clean energy space of transportation is we need more time to establish new technologies and to pick the right technology to move forward that supports transportation logistics across the state. And that's electrification or hydrogen fueling of ferries, trucks, trains. There's a lot of action coming down the line that has limited future allocation of fossil fuel usage in those transportation mediums. However, the technology has not advanced enough at this stage to pick the best technology for each use. And we really suffer in being able to support those industries without a level-headed approach to phasing out some of the technologies that we do want to phase out for environmental safety. However, we need to support a very balanced approach, and that has been pretty much the standing viewpoint on our transportation priorities for several years. And I welcome any of you to pin on this too, because all of us have experience with the transportation priorities. Specific to some projects throughout our region though, as our kind of regional transportation organization, Benton Franklin Council of Governments puts together their transportation, it's called TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan. Had to get there, had to get back to that acronym, that takes into consideration a wide gamut of regional projects and prioritizes them based on what, well, one, what we think can be funded by the state, and two, what are projects that are most impactful to improving region-wide transportation prioritization and preservation of our existing infrastructure. The projects that really came to the forefront in the TIP this year and likewise were supported by the Legislative Council were development of the Broadmoor corridor in Pasco, development of the transportation infrastructure to serve the Ryman Industrial Center in North Pasco, support for Vista Field in Kennewick and the transportation infrastructure that really changes the look of that area and the efficiency of moving traffic throughout Kennewick. Lewis and Clark Ranch in West Richland, which is a lot of the substantial residential development. Horn Rapids Industrial Park, which really leads to a lot of the transportation infrastructure for industrial and logistics traffic, and really re-envisioning some of the increased demand and usage of Central Richland's waterfront and core downtown areas. There's a bunch of projects within that that serve to improve existing confluences of transportation, but there's also a lot of new projects in there. And we support a cross-section of vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian, and heavy truck industrial traffic throughout those projects.
That you did a good job. That's our thickest position paper, Miles. You did a good job of kind of summing that up, and I think it will be interesting to see. State's going to do a transportation bill. Obviously, there's some federal dollars now in the state's budget. It'll be interesting to see how some of those things happen. I know a big part of what the state has been I wouldn't say burdened with, but this thing the state needs to address is salmon recovery on the west side with culverts. And hopefully there'll be some federal dollars from some of the relief packages that they've got that could offset that. And they could then roll more of our state dollars into our local programs that you just talked about. I'm going to cover the next two pretty quickly and then give Hector the floor to talk about tourism, which is really a critical part of, yeah.
I'll note really quick, thank you to my wife, the commiserate planner in our relationship. She just texted me that the transportation improvement, the TIP is the Transportation Improvement Program, and you can find more information about it in the link that Tracy added to the chat.
Perfect. Tell her thanks for us for the for the TIP, literally. Our next position paper is rural broadband, and again, this is critical. It's very broad. But especially as we see more families transitioning to remote work, there's a new opportunity, I think, for some of our rural communities, but they can't do it without broadband. And our position paper generally talks about that, as well as supports on the rural sector for agriculture, education, and small business, in some of our smaller communities. And I'll just say generally, the challenge that we have with broadband is private companies, like we have here in the core of the Tri-Cities, there's a density equation where deploying their own proprietary infrastructure works for them in their business model. As the density goes down, as you get further in between homes or houses or ranches or farms, that number goes down where they can't afford to make that investment. So there is some public investment that needs to be made in rural broadband. There are federal dollars that weren't available before to be able to do that. Traditionally, different entities throughout the state have taken a position on rural broadband. One of the great ones, I think, is on the further east side, which is Port of Whitman. They've come up with some cool funding models. They've actually got support from CURB, which is an economic development infrastructure grant program and loan program. So hopefully there's some learnings that come out of that we can all learn from. But then focusing on rural broadband is a real position that we want to make sure that the legislature addresses for sure. The last one I'll cover is taxes and spending, and I'll just simply say that the state of Washington has record budget surpluses projected out of our current tax structure and with the federal financing that's coming in. This position is really in line with the Association of Washington Businesses that we all belong to and are supportive of. But essentially, it's generally saying that we need to take a look at tax relief. When we talk about job creation and economic development, that we're all in that industry. Some changes in the B&O tax would help Washington be much more competitive with surrounding states. So that might be something that we want to take a look at. Let's use those budget surpluses thoughtfully and come up with some good fiscal policy for the state. But let's take a hard look at tax policy changes that might reduce the tax burden for businesses and individuals in the state of Washington. So now here's our best one, right, Hector? The tourism in the Tri-Cities and in Washington. Take it away.
Carl,
Yes.
before we jump on from rural broadband, I did want to mention Department of Commerce supports the state broadband office. And one of the ways that we are most able to demonstrate the need for residential broadband throughout our community, which is so important during this phase of remote work, is to participate, every household to participate in the Washington State Broadband Survey. You can Google Washington State Broadband Survey, or I'm sure Tracy could add it to the chat if she has a moment. But that's such a supportive program to keep us rolling. And for rural broadband, CURB has, I can't say enough good things about CURB and how they've supported us. And CURB through, I forgot to mention this in economic development, but we are asking for them to increase and support a $2.5 million package for CURB to support other infrastructure priorities this year. Sorry, Hector.
Thanks, Miles. No, that's a good point. CURB's provided critical financing for a lot of the projects that we've talked about and that you guys are working on, especially at the port level. Really, really good support there. Okay, Hector, here we go.
Yeah, all right. With the final one here, tourism. Well, tourism, is huge here in Tri-Cities, right? It fuels our economy and it creates jobs here. So you're seeing jobs in retail, lodging, hospitality, food and beverage, all these types of establishments. But since 2019, we suffered tremendous loss of 40% reduction in visitor expenditures across the whole state. That's about $8 billion across the state of Washington. And so in 2021, the legislature invested $4 million for tourism recovery. And our tourism partners are currently right now implementing these recovery plans. And so these will then in turn generate new tax dollars and fuel our local economy here in the Tri-Cities. But more needs to be done, right, for tourism. More needs to be done to fully recover our tourism economic status that we have here. So we have a couple bills that we actually know of as we were writing these and putting our positions papers together, and that we were in support of. And the first one is creating a Washington wine specialty license plate. And this is one of those license plates which would, with the proceeds, they would be dedicated to the Washington Tourism Alliance. And for those that may not be familiar with the Tourism Alliance, it's a membership-based nonprofit organization that's responsible for marketing the state to the whole nation and the world. And so promoting our state's worldwide recognized wine industry and also creating additional revenue source for tourism is going to be a win-win for both of us, for both entities. So that's actually, there's a Senate bill tied to that, or actually a House bill. It's 1530. And so that's the one we'll be watching closely to see if that creation of the specialty license plate can get done here this session. Another one is the expansion of motion picture competitiveness program. And this is a B&O tax credit incentive to bring and keep film and television production in Washington State. So it's these kind of productions that help increase spending in our local communities, again, at the restaurants, the hotels, grocery stores, and all these businesses in our local communities. And so these none of these dollars are paid out of the program until after jobs have been created for Washington workers and projects have been invested in Washington businesses. So the long-term effects or impacts of these productions really elevates the visibility of Washington State and potential for visitors to come from across the world. And so there's actually a House bill and a Senate bill in place right now. That's let's see, Senate Bill 5760 and then House Bill 1914 that is looking at expand this motion picture competitiveness program. And again, TriCities has recently hosted several productions here. Many of you might have seen there's a McDonald's commercial that's a national commercial that was done here over at a family farm here in Pasco. And so that was pretty neat to see here. And that had room nights tied to it. So you have a whole production crew that comes in. They generated 225 room nights, hotel room nights of the crew just coming in here in Kennewick. They also had another hit 150 in a neighboring city as well, just from bringing in that crew for that time frame. And there's some other ones too. I know, putting my Water Follies hat, I guess, too. I know the Water Follies Association provided support for a movie called Devotion. And this was done last year around this time frame. Last year, it's an independent film that was filmed along the Snake River in Pasco. And then there's another documentary that was filmed just recently in Richland. So these kind of productions actually help your local economy. So looking forward to those initiatives. And then finally, another component that we're looking to is just making sure that the lodging tax and tourism promotion, also known as TPA area, those statutes, we want to make sure that they remain as originally passed in 2013 legislative session. So that's, we just want to make sure that the assessment should only be invested on activities that result in increased visitor spending. Because we're seeing that there are some bills right now, or there's one right now that's looking at expanding the flexibility of existing lodging taxes for affordable workforce housing. And so again, we just want to make sure that those funds are being used for what they were intended for, and that is increased visitor spending. So again, just we want to support Washington State tourism together as an industry, as a state. It's over $13 billion that's produced for visitor spending in the whole state. So want to make sure we're supporting those impacted by tourism here.
That's great, Hector. I just want to give a shout out to you and the team of Visit Tri-Cities, because as we talk about economic development, obviously the industries that are supported directly by tourism is huge, but then everything else that we're trying to do, we already talked about it a couple times, especially in some of these specific position papers. We need talent. We need a skilled workforce. We need to attract people here now. And the work that you guys do at Visit Tri-Cities is so critically important to showing off our community, right? To just tell people like, hey man, the Tri-Cities is a great place to visit. And it's also a better place to live and work. And, we want to kind of make that jump. You guys are really great about providing that messaging on that. And it's just critical how we all work together, which I think, we talked about it a lot today, but Tri-Cities Legislative Council is a great example of the collaboration that we have here. Although we have separate jurisdictions and these, boundaries, I think this is a great example of how we all come together to make sure that we're asking the legislature to partner with us for the right decisions for Tri-Cities. We've gone over time. I mean, we probably could have talked for 2 or 3 hours, but I really appreciate everybody joining us today. This is a good overview of what the Leg Council has put together and some things that we're looking forward to. Let's just go around and I'll thank everybody. Miles, who have some parting words for us.
I do, and I apologize. This is on a less light note. And not super related to legislation, but I just wanted to recognize that a super champion of Washington wine legislation, Washington wine industry support, Dr. Byron Marlowe, passed away in December unexpectedly. Byron was a huge supporter and advocate of the Washington wine license plate. He was a champion for the Walter Clore Center in Prosser. He had set a lot of plans in place that were going to continue on in his memory. It's just such a loss for this community. He was an absolute champion of wine and beverage business in the community and the state, and really wanted to see the Washington wine industry be recognized worldwide. Byron, although there will not be a local celebration of life, there will be some further announcements on a honorary 5K run walk in his memory on February 19th to coincide with his celebration of life back in Arizona. But again, I just wanted to recognize Byron and just say that, you know, he will be sorely missed in the community for his contributions to supporting the Washington wine industry.
Thanks for bringing that up, Miles. It's a huge loss for all of us, but as Hector talked about how critical the wine industry is for tourism and for our economy in general, it's a huge champion and be sorely missed for sure. Thank you. Hector, closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say thank you to our co-chairs for the Legislative Council this year. Thank you, Miles, for taking the lead. Miles with the Port of Benton, you've been awesome, and thank you for doing that. And as well, our other co-chair couldn't be here today, Stacy West with Bechtel National. Huge shout out to her as well. Much appreciated. Their time is much appreciated. And then also, I would ask everyone that's listening to just get involved, right? And feel free to reach out to us. I know we mentioned that earlier, but you can all follow these bills and go on to, ledge, that's leg.wa.gov, and take a look at, follow these bills and see what's going on in our state. And feel free to reach out to us and if you have any questions, but it's good to get involved and get out there and testify if you can and sign into some of these committees. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector. All right, David, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I think really just kind of echoing exactly what Hector said. Big thanks to Miles and to Stacy. It takes a lot of time and effort to pull all this together, and it's very much appreciated. So thanks to them, and echoing, I guess, what both Hector and Miles said about the opportunities with remote testimony. In years past, Hector and I, one time, I think we met each other at the airport at about 5 o'clock in the morning, hoping to catch a flight to Olympia, and it was canceled, and that was a tough day. But the ability to testify remotely is really valuable, and so I encourage everybody to take advantage of that and to follow what's happening throughout the legislative session.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for your time today. Sorry we went a little bit long, but really, really good and critical discussion. Appreciate everybody's partnership and echo the thanks to Miles and Stacy for co-chairing this year. You guys did a great job and it's a great package. So we look forward to some great things this legislative session. Thanks again. Have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on the 28th for the next Coffee with Karl. Thank you.